What's up everyone, Trent here. I've just come off a binge watch of all 13 episodes of Season 2 of The Punisher, Frank Castle's bloody return to Netflix. Now, there will be some spoilers to key character arcs and moments in this series, so if you don't want to know what goes on, look away now, click away. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you like what you see, and as always, you're watching The Fortress. Let's get into this. Okay, so Season 2 of The Punisher is a big mixed bag. I want to say it's a fantastic series, and whilst I did enjoy it for the most part, there are some things that I really didn't enjoy. But I'm going to focus on the things that I did for now. That being said, the thing I enjoyed the most by far was Jon Bernthal returning to the role of Frank. He is just absolutely amazing and nails Frank Castle, whether it's the aggression, whether it's the sympathy, whether it's the trauma you see. Every bit of emotion is poured out onto the screen and he basically steals the show every time. Even though it is a show about him, you'd be surprised just how little he's actually shown in this series. A lot of focus goes on to other characters in the show, such as Curtis, Amy, Billy Russo, and Detective Madani. But when Frank is on screen, he makes the most of it. Jon Bernthal was just phenomenal. And that being said, a lot of the cast who return from Season 1 really lift their games and make it more enjoyable. Amber Rose Raver as Agent Madani, she really lifts her game. Even though she's not really great with expression or delivery of tone, she gets a lot more aggression in this series because of the trauma she experienced of Billy Russo shooting her in the head at the end of Season 1. And that being said, that's a lot of the focus of the series, is the relationship between Russo and Madani. The way the trailer's made out, it was going to be Frank and Billy having a massive showdown. This isn't the case at all. In fact, the main antagonist of the series is Josh Stewart's Jon Pilgrim. Now, Jon Pilgrim is actually one of the standout characters, and he's a character who has a massive crime background, who finds God and acts in the name of God under the direction of the Schultz family, a really powerful family who have a senator in the US government. Now, he's introduced to try and clean up an extortion scheme gone wrong, which is where Amy is introduced to Frank Castle. Amy's involved in this scheme, and anyone who's involved in it is killed off, and Jon is the person going after him. So Frank protects Amy, travels to New York, and that's where the kind of story arcs between Billy Russo and Frank cross paths. But for the majority of the season, Russo is a secondary character. And that's not a bad thing. Pilgrim's character is actually really well done. It's like one of the Punisher Max comics, where you go up against one of those really over-the-top villains that has a backstory and a gimmick that is just ludicrous, like kind of Barracuda. Pilgrim doing all these actions in the name of God, he's doing these reprehensible things, but he's doing them in the name of his faith and challenging his faith. It goes against everything he believes in, but he believes in it so much that he's purifying the world of all the non-believers and the sinners, because he was a sinner. You actually see a scene of him where he whips himself on the back whilst he's got all these kind of neo-Nazi tattoos around. So one of the things that kind of happens is you've got Pilgrim, who acts as a background character for a couple of episodes where Russo takes the shining, and then you have Pilgrim take over and Russo take a back seat, which is something that I have not really seen done with the Netflix series. A lot of the Netflix series, such as Luke Cage and Daredevil, have had a either single villain overarching in the plot, or the first 6 episodes has been one villain, such as Luke Cage with Cottonmouth, and the final 6 episodes of the series you have the main antagonist kind of take over, which is what happened with Black Mariah. This is not the case in this season. You have both plots of the villains working well and intertwining with each other. They kind of connect but kind of don't. When Frank is focused on Billy, that's when Pilgrim strikes and kind of takes back their plan and puts a wrench in it. So it kind of works really well to give some sort of sense of urgency and unpredictability to the plot, but Russo's arc is the weakest, unfortunately. Now, while Russo's arc is probably the weakest of the show and what fans are probably going to dislike the most about the series, there is a really good dynamic between him and his psychologist Krista, played by Fliorana Lima. In this, I would compare it to a Harley Quinn-Joker relationship. The psychologist falls in love with the psychotic because of all the trauma and eventually kind of becomes like him. She really connects with him on an intimate level because she's experienced trauma as well and has fears. She knows what he's going through, and in turn, he kind of manipulates her and twists her in his own way by playing a victim himself to get her to be like him. And it ultimately comes down to a final showdown between her and Agent Madani in a really tense scene which sees Madani realize that she's fallen in love and protecting Billy Russo. But is there enough to say that this series is excellent? It's definitely not the strongest of the Netflix series. I personally like it more than Punisher Season 1 because there is so much more going on, and the subplots going on I feel are a lot stronger. And the characters intertwine a lot more, which allows for a lot of character growth. You get some really good moments with Curtis and Frank, who talk about their time in the army and how they've struggled to recuperate. But you can't help but notice that there's this undertone that is insinuating that all veterans who aren't properly looked after are going to turn villainous. Because Billy eventually gets a lot of Curtis's kind of support group to follow him and commit crimes and heinous acts. That kind of didn't really sit well with me. And Billy, yeah, he was just really not a great leader. It's one of those seasons where there's some episodes that are really fantastic, but it's just so inconsistent. The first 3 episodes, it's a very slow burn. You're not going to get into too much. A lot of the characters that were in those first 3 episodes didn't make it past that. And then it's in New York City, and it's like the reset button's been hit again. You are starting to follow Amy's story arc, and you're starting to follow Billy's story arc, and those kind of first 3 episodes are a waste of time, which makes me wonder whether the 13 episode count for the season is too much again. And I think it's one of those things where it did feel like it's too much, but it's also one of those seasons I couldn't sit through Luke Cage Season 2 or Iron Fist Season 2 on a binge session. I had to take breaks. This season I was really able to get through. So there were really engaging moments, but it was just so inconsistent and the pacing was really off at some points. The strongest points were the characterization elements. There were some really good moments between Amy and Frank, and Curtis and Frank, and Madani and Frank even. You also had characters returning from previous seasons, like Deborah Ann Wool as Karen Page. Why she was there, useless character, get rid of her. But one of the standouts was Daredevil character, Detective Mahoney, who kind of intertwines himself in this subplot involving Billy Russo and Agent Madani and Frank, and trying to come down to it. He captures Frank a few times, and eventually Frank saves his life, and his moral compass is still fixed, but he understands that Frank is for the betterment sometimes and has to do things his way. It's a beautifully shot season. There are some really great moments, some really good lighting, some really suspenseful and tense moments. The theme music that they have playing when Billy Russo is in the scene, it's kind of like it insinuates psychoticness. It's kind of strings plucking and weird sounds going over the top with a deep bass line. But ultimately, I was disappointed in how Jigsaw was handled. And he's killed off, so there's no point coming back for a season 3 with him. Now, one thing that really bugged me about this season is that the entire thing felt like a huge reset. We had Frank, who'd gone through this story arc of becoming the Punisher and fulfilling his destiny, and he's been cleared, but we've been reset again. He's no longer the Punisher at the start of Season 2, which was how he was at the start of Season 1, and he kind of has to grow again. But what else has been reset is Billy Russo. He's got amnesia because of the attack of Frank, and we then have to go through all these episodes that feel kind of wasted as to how Billy kind of should be, where we're expecting this big climactic showdown between him and Frank throughout the entire season, and instead it's him now finding out what happened and led him to get all these scars on his face. And whilst it is a really, really enjoyable psychological take on how Billy is able to kind of piece himself together, excuse the pun, like a jigsaw piece, he's very much wasted in terms of the episode spacing. We don't need to go through this kind of revisiting of the events of Season 1. Even if you are a new fan and watching Season 2 for the first time, there's a recap at the start. So all those events of Season 1 feel like they're kind of null and void, because we're now going through a growth arc of Billy kind of becoming the asshole that he was in Season 1 because of his amnesia. It does lead to the good relationship between him and his psychologist, but it's just a wasted opportunity. He should have been a psycho from the get-go and really punishing and challenging Frank. It should have been why Frank was drawn back. And yeah, it may sound like a fan theory, but if you're going to have Billy be a main part of the season and a villain, he needs to act more villainous. Don't try to make him sympathetic. He's not sympathetic. He is an asshole. We saw that in Season 1. Just because he's a victim and has mental issues doesn't necessarily mean we need to connect with him as an audience. I know for a fact I didn't connect with him as an audience. I knew of all the things that he'd done. So I'm not going to sympathize with him. That's what the psychologist did. But as a viewer, I was just like, this is wasting my time. I feel like I'm wasting my time here watching this character growth when we've already seen it, and we'd already seen his deterioration. So that kind of felt like a really big kind of kick in the gut for me, that Jigsaw was wasted and kind of seen as a sympathetic character when he shouldn't have been. It wasn't the showdown that we expected. He's meant to be this lunatic, and whilst Ben Barnes did a great job of playing this psychotic, he was able to, like, if you had to compare Ben Barnes's acting to anything in this season, it'd be James McAvoy's acting in Split, where he's got all these different kind of personality traits coming through, and he's getting all these tweaks and twisting, and you see the change and transition of his perception physically and mentally. It's just one of those seasons that the inconsistencies in some of the decisions just don't make any sense. We don't see a lot of bloodbaths that we'd expect with Punisher. It's much more of a let's explore the trauma that people have experienced, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is when you're repeating the same themes from season 1, and it really sets you back. The other thing, Agent Madani's acting, it is very, very bland. She was not the greatest actor in season 1, and here we get more of the same, more of the mumbling, the quick expression, and not being able to understand, and just her eyes doing the acting. We don't really see much else. The fight scene between her and the psychologist later on, it's literally one of the cringiest things you'll see. It's them kind of just holding each other and trying not to hurt each other. She chokes her at one point. You can really kind of... You're taken back by it because you see that they're not actually really choking much. But for the most part, the action is fantastic. A lot of blood, a lot of violence, mostly led by Bernthal. He's just great, and really he throws himself into the fight scenes. And they were quite dynamic, some really good shootouts. There were some really interesting, odd shootouts where it looks like they're just kind of spraying bullets at nothing. And then it cuts to police kind of running around disheveled where bullets are ricocheting, but it doesn't seem like that's where they're going. I don't know, that could have just been my own take on it, but for the most part, action was fantastic. There was a really good set piece in episode 3 where Frank's helping out some prison guards in Minnesota, and he ends up kind of doing a one-man army thing against this army in forest land at night, and you see him use his military tactics to just go around. He's silent, and he's just got this fast action machine gun, and just going running along, and it's full, quick-paced, frantic. That's the way Punisher should be, and that was really done. That's one of the best aspects of the show there, were the action scenes. But yeah, there was just some... It was more the character build-up for certain characters that were weak for me, unfortunately. Now, the relationship between Frank and Amy is one of the highlights of the show. Amy was actually really a difficult character to connect with early on. She was just a bratty kid. But when she kind of accepted that Frank's trying to help her get out of this extortion scheme, you really start to see that Frank cares about people. And that's one of the themes, is that even though Frank does these terrible things, he won't cross that line, and Madani mentions that he has a code. You get told by Curtis that he really cares for people. And you see that come through with Frank kind of taking Amy under his wing, which gave me remnants of one of the recent Punisher comics where, I think it was Punisher Warzone, where he kind of has one of the cops come and be his partner. He trains her up and she acts like a female Punisher. He kind of takes Amy under his wing like that as a father-daughter thing. Amy talks a lot about his kids, and you can tell that Frank is seeing Amy as kind of his daughter, so he acts as a father figure looking out to protect her in his own way, which is gruesome, bloody, and freaks her out. But he teaches her how to handle firearms, and you see her growth throughout the season. She ends up being able to protect herself quite well. And it all comes to a head in episode 13 against Jon Pilgrim. So a lot of these elements, whilst they were a slow burn, they were quite rewarding. I did really enjoy this season. If I had to give it a rating, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I did enjoy a lot of the stuff, a lot of the characterization. The plot, that was inconsistent, and I really didn't enjoy the arc that Russo went on. I feel like the reset button of him having amnesia really detracted from what could have been a really awesome season. And just, the show is called The Punisher. He needs to punish a lot more. There were some really uncharacteristic moments for Frank where he didn't actually kill people, and he kind of felt compassion for them. Even though one of them, he did have a family, but there were decisions where his emotions came in. We've had 2 seasons where Frank, in Daredevil season 2, he was this hardened killer who wouldn't think twice about killing someone. Same with Punisher season 1. Why have this kind of compassion come in season 2, where he starts getting a moral compass? It just doesn't make any sense, really. That's a nitpick, but yeah, there were some things in the plot that I didn't enjoy, and some of the relationships were a bit bland and inconsistencies in the plot. So overall, I did enjoy it, but it just was a bit of a weaker Netflix series for me. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Trent. Subscribe to our channel. Give us a thumbs up. I really like engaging with you guys in the comments and hearing your theories and your reviews so we can have a good discussion. Anyway, you're watching The Fortress.